As the diver approaches the rocks, he knows there is something different about this reef. That's because it's not a reef at all. He realises he may just have stumbled across the remains of a long-lost city, and he is swimming around its 4-kilometre wall. Academics believe this may be what's left of the near 2,000-year-old city of Rapta, the southernmost city of the ancient world, off the coast of modern Tanzania. And after a lifetime of looking for underwater discoveries, Alan Sutton swam into it on his birthday.
Yeah, it was quite a special moment because it's a very, very large site, and I wasn't expecting to find anything that big. So to actually get to it, see it, and then look around and realize the scale of the place, it was quite jaw-dropping.
He found it after spotting this from a helicopter and decided to work out what it was. But he didn't realise his luck. The remains have laid underwater for centuries and are only exposed on particularly low spring tides. Since then, a professor from Dar es Salaam University has been to the site and says it could change our understanding of history.
That area is like really bigger than the center of modern Dar es Salaam. Sincerely, it is a very big significance, a major significance. Just imagine, this was the southernmost city of the ancient time. Now, this is very important for the history of humanity, for the history of Tanzania and Africa.
Since the earliest times of archaeology, they have been looking for a city known as Azania, with its capital Rapta, somewhere in southern Africa. It was thought to be much higher up, somewhere in Congo, somewhere maybe in Kenya. But this has all been shattered by finding such an old civilization located this deep into Africa. The search for Rapta and Azania in general was not something that was done for no reason. It's not like these people came up and said there must be a civilization located somewhere in southern Africa. But instead there were writings by Romans who said that there is a civilization located at the southernmost point of the world. And if you go there, you will find a place called Azania. And the people there trade with people all over the world. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea said that these people traded mainly rhinoceros horns and shells. And then you have Ptolemy, who said that these people were living in an organized settlement with giant stone walls. Nothing of the sort had ever been found. But from about 2013 to 2016, it became fairly obvious that the walls that once were inside of the continent were located on an island called Mafia Island in Tanzania, and they had been consumed by the waters. These obviously manned structures have now been confirmed. The only thing that's not confirmed, and it's really hard to confirm it, is whether or not the people who lived here would have called it Azania or Rapta. It's in the right area, and it's been radiocarbon dated to the right date. Every American magazine and newspaper went to write about this civilization in 2013, but most people in the world did not notice. So let's read about it from Bloomberg. The Atlantis of Africa may be hiding near a private island retreat. On a clear day in February 2013, the turbulent waters off the coast of Mafia Island, one of the islets in the Zanzibar archipelago, had fallen to an unusually low tide. A few nautical miles away, a strange formation poked above sea level. A helicopter whirred overhead. For years, the lost city of Rapta had baffled scholars, divers, and archaeologists dating to roughly 50 AD. It was originally documented in Ptolemy's geography as Africa's first metropolis and a trading hub for tortoise shells and metal weapons. It was one of the wealthiest cities of its time, yet little has been added to Rapta story since the disappearance more than 1,600 years ago, aside from the vague discovery that its remains were buried somewhere off the coast of Africa. The interesting thing about these stones is that they seem to be better built than some of the civilizations that would come after Rapta. It was, in fact, thought to be one of the greatest civilizations at the time and was described as on par with any other civilization in the world. The Romans said they traded with Assassinids. And of course, on top of that, they mentioned that the winds blew some of the Asians into the coasts of that area, of which they were not familiar with, known as Madagascar, and from there was trade. This completely changes the story of Africa and it completely changes how Africa came to be exactly what it is. Now, keep in mind, the date of this civilization is during the time of Jesus. That's when the people discovered it, that's when the Romans were trading with it. When it was built is a different question. Prior to the 2010s, there used to be an argument between African scholars, including one that is featured in this video. And the argument was, firstly, when did the Bantu arrive in that region? Because it's thought that this is a Bantu civilization. Pottery has been found that clearly indicates that this is a Bantu civilization. But not only that, they used to butt heads on if the Swahili coast was an Arab or non Arab civilization, and they argued furiously. This ended all the arguments. Every single African scholar that once argued that the Arabs founded brickwork of any kind in this region has abandoned that theory. Since then, they had looked at other artifacts within the region. This is still the wall, the 4 kilometer wide wall enclosure. Since then, they've looked at different civilizations like Kilwa, and by digging, they've started realizing that Kilwa did not have many Arab traits. It was a Muslim civilization, so it had Muslim traits, but it really didn't have a lot of Arab traits. For one, their foundations are the same as that found outside of Arabia. In other words, and I hate to say this, they're not as good as the foundations that are found in Arabia. But you start to notice that later on they start using ornament items that are used by the Arabs to strengthen the civilization. But these buildings that were made by these Africans using very African features are then used later. It's not that the Swahili coast is a not so favorable place because it's an Arab civilization. I'd be perfectly okay if it was. The problem is DNA evidence has now come out showing that 70%, at least 70% of funerals that were found in a very important place were all of black origin. But let's not focus at the Swahili coast for now. Let's first go back to this ancient civilization and let's see what the Romans had to say specifically about Rapta and this area. Now remember, they were so familiar with North Africa that they knew exactly where the rhinos came from. These works are from Ptolemy discussing Rapta and other civilizations. Remember, Rapta is located in Tanzania, but let's see if his work agrees with this. They are also corrected by measuring journeys by water. Concerning the voyage from Aramata to Rapta, Marinus tells us that a certain Diogenes, one of those who were accustomed to sail to India, having been driven out of his course and being off the coasts, of which lies the promontory of Raptum, he tells us also that certain Theophilus, one of those who were accustomed to sail to Azania, driven from Rapta by the south wind, came to Aramata. On the 20th day, in neither of these cases does he tell us how many days were occupied in actual sailing, but merely states that Theophilus took 20 days and Diogenes, who sailed along the coast of Troglodytia, took 25 days. Therefore, although Diogenes sailed from Aramata to the swamps, to the south of which lies the promontory of Raptum, in 25 days, the Theophilus from Rapta to Aramata a greater distance in 20 days, and although Theophilus tells us that a single day's sailing under favorable circumstances is calculated at 1,000 stadia, Dioscorus nevertheless says that the voyage from Rapta to the promontory of Prusum, which takes many days as computed by Diogenes, is only 5,000 stadia. The wind, he says, varies very suddenly at the equator, and squalls around the equator on either side of the line are more dangerous. From these considerations, we thought we ought not to assent to the numbering of the days, because it is plain to all that on the reckoning made by Marinus, the Ethiopians and the haunts of the rhinoceros should be moved to the cold zone from the earth that is opposite to ours. Reason herself asserts that animals and all plants, and he carries on in this fashion. Now, the interesting parts there, obviously, is that he mentions other places that we know where they are. For example, Aramata. As you can see here, Aramata is located at the very tip of the Horn of Africa. And if you keep going down, you can see there. If you go right to the bottom, you can see Rapta, Azania, Bantu peoples, Cushitic people, blah, blah, blah. Now, the Cushitic people or the Cushitic idea used to be a theory that, and this is what they usually do, the Cushitic idea was the final block between Afro-Asiatic world and the non-Afro-Asiatic world. But the Cushitic people had never reached these parts by this time. And so we know that this civilization is a Bantu civilization. But not only that, the pottery is consistent with the Bantu civilization. The used to be thought made up civilization by these Europeans not only now seems to be real, but follows such specific and detailed reports about it that no one dismisses it anymore. In fact, almost no archaeologist or historian who knows about Rapta and knows about this civilization dismisses it. Instead, the way they look at it now is how, and also how does it connect to other civilizations like Great Zimbabwe and places like that. It did make sense a little bit that Great Zimbabwe out of nowhere creates a great civilization, and no one has ever built anything close to that prior to that. But now that we know that, I mean, if you take the date that's given for Great Zimbabwe, over 1,000 years before Great Zimbabwe, there was this civilization. On trade with Rapta, this is what he says. We have learned also from the merchants that from Arabia Felix, this is Yemen, they sailed to Aramata, to Azania, to Rapta, and to the regions called Barbary. This sailing is not exactly south, but southwest. The voyage from Rapta to Prusum is also southwest. The lakes from which the Nile takes its beginning are not near the sea, but are very far inland. The the shoreline from the Aramata promontory to Rapta is otherwise. Before we continue reading, I want to make sure I don't confuse you. So you see there it's written Yemen. That place is used to be known as Arabia Felix. Notice Saudi Arabia is called Arabia. This entire region was Arabia, but this place was called Arabia Felix. So southwest, west, we're moving towards Somalia, Sudan, Djibouti, those places. Southwest, we're moving down from there. So, in other words, it's going completely away from Egypt, away from Somalia, and even without thinking about it, we end up in Tanzania. The shoreline from Aramata promontory to Raptor is otherwise than Marinus has shown it to be, nor can any ordinary day and night voyage be counted in stadia because of the changeableness of the winds at the equator, but is limited to about 400 or 500 stadia. At the most, there is first of all a continuous bay in which, after sailing for one day from Aramata, we come to Panaucone and to Upone, an imperium distant one day's sail from Panacone. Sailing from the Emporium, they say that we enter another bay which marks the beginning of Azame, at the entrance to which appears the Zingis promontory. Now, of course, it's important to separate this because, of course, the word zingi is one of those words that's actually thought to have originated from China, describing the people from that area. It's also thought to have originated from maybe India or one of those places. This word, zingi, which sounds like nothing usual in Africa or even in Greek, might be an indication of trade very, very far away. Now, the Zingi, as you can see here, are somewhat different than the people of Aramata, but today we just consider everybody in the Swahili coast as Zanj. And Mount Phalangus, remarkable for its three peaks. The name of this bay is Apapoko, and it takes 2 days and nights to cross it. After this is Parvum Litis, or Little Shore, at the distance of 2 days' voyages, then Magnum Litis of the five distance. The last two are said to occupy the same time in sailing. A further 4 days' sailing, they say, brings us to another bay in which there is an emporium of Essina. It requires 2 days and nights to cross this bay, then after a day and night and sail, and comes to the seaport of Seraponius. Thence begins the bay which leads to Rapta, a voyage of 3 days and nights. At the head of this bay, they say there is an emporium called Tony. I too have fallen for the trap of making sure that civilizations that are located in the Swahili coast are undermined compared to those of Great Zimbabwe because those are considered more African in real life than these. But with this evidence, you can see why some of the scholars are bending towards the Swahili coast being reignited once again as a true African civilization. Now, of course, there are things in the Kilwa civilization that point to foreign introductions, but remember, some foreign interventions do not take away any African civilization. And these are later introductions, as we can see, and I'm not going to read this, in Al Masudi's book, where he says that this kingdom was taken over in 800 AD, but the oldest foundations that are put in Kilwa are from 600 to 700 AD, with people living in this region since the first century. The many domes at the top are thought to be just some Muslim introduction, but in real life they point to India more than they point to the Islamic world. And the reason this is because these places were taking things from all over the world and introducing them to their architecture, which they built with coral and other stuff like that. This isn't the first place built of coral, and it's thought that the Muslims learned from these people and built with what they built with. Later, lime was introduced and was used. These graves represent Kilwa. These are ancient graves. They might look modern, but they represent the civilization. And genetics has been done on these people, and like I said, about 70% of them have been traced to Africa with no genetic mix, and then a small number, 30%, have been mixed with Persian Arab DNA. The story of this civilization and why it died in 500 years is unknown. It's not known why the civilization just disappeared out of nowhere when it was known to be one of the greatest. But we do know that as soon as the civilization goes away, the trade still remains. As soon as it's gone, we see other people with this trade elsewhere, trading with Indonesians, trading with Indians, trading with the Chinese. We've shown many glass and ceramics and all of that coming from China, India, Europe, Arabia Felix being the greatest trader. A lot of the time, the people didn't sail here, they just came from Arabia Felix. Arabia Felix being Yemen. This image should help us understand the distances that we're talking about right now. So this is Kilwa, it's a later civilization, and like I said, it's not as good as Azania as a civilization. And of course, Azania started the trade, and there was pottery and all of that. But that's a conversation for another day. What's actually interesting is that this civilization was not as big as Azania. Remember, the wall of Azania is 4 kilometers. 100 meters is usually a normal sprint in the Olympics is about 100 meters, 100-meter dash, right? 100 meters times by 10,000 meters is 1 kilometer. Now, we're not talking about a people running that distance. We're talking about people making a wall of that distance, 4 times that, because it was 4 kilometers. That's the sizes we're dealing with here.
Africa on the coast of East. Look there. Ptolemy is telling us these people here are known as Rafidi Ethiopians. But Ethiopians means black people. The black people known as Rafidi. Now, I want to take you to a difficult part of the presentation, which I call In Search of Elusive Metropolis of Rapta. And we think we have discovered the metropolis of Rapta. You can see, while in this area where we think Rapta could have been, I'm standing in front of boulders. Those boulders of Rapta's circumference wall, maybe, and you can see a person standing somewhere there. This is our current PhD student. There are several aspects or features which we found underwater in that area which we think it could be Rapta. That's a good example. You can see there. That is a wall underwater, and we think it was a house of Rapta.
The professor then shows us pottery from India during the Azanian period, meaning pottery dating from 2000 years ago from India.
Those are the pottery which belong to the people of Azania, known as early Iron Age pottery. Here, top one there, this one, it is gold, silver, and glass. We've collected more from elsewhere, and it seems like there was good trade between the people of Azania and the Roman people. What I show you next year are Roman pottery. These are Roman pottery from Mafia Island, near the area where I was showing you underwater structures, probably of Raptor. And this one is another Roman terra siglata. It's found in Tanga area, the area where the colonialists found many Roman beads, and we don't know where the Roman beads are today. And there are some of the pottery of the Azanian period. They are from India. Particularly, I'm referring to those ones. They are pottery from India, brought for trade here. More pottery from Zanzibar, from Achaga Cave. Some are from Persia, others are Roman, and so on.
So there you have it. And of course, the reason why I left that in there is because we can't separate rocks from materials that can be carbon dated. And you can see there that the pottery ranges from Romans, right, from the Roman period to India, meaning that this place, Azania, was not a joke civilization. It was not one of these places that is all hype and no delivery, like a lot of civilizations around the world, and in fact in Africa, tend to be.